So welcome everyone. My name's Claire. I coordinate the events at New Renaissance Bookshop, and I'm super happy you're all here. It's a big group tonight, and I'm happy Judith's here. She had power outage earlier this morning, so we're happy the weather permitted us all to be together tonight. So Judith's new book is coming out in March, so I included the link to her new book if you'd like to pre-order it, Making Peace with Death and Dying. And you can find that link over in the chat, and you can order it from our online bookshop. So Judith is an educator and mentor whose mission is to help others to raise the level of consciousness from which they are living their lives. For over 40 years, she has been studying and teaching the dynamics of how our beliefs inform our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors as individuals and in our relationships, social order, culture, and institutions. Judith's work draws upon her own life lessons, wisdom teachings from around the world, doctoral degrees in social psychology and spiritual science, and her experience mentoring others since 1983. Ordained as an interfaith minister in 1985, she serves as a chaplain at her local hospital and counsels the grieving. Johnson is the author of The Wedding Ceremony Planner, the essential guide to the most important part of your wedding day, and Writing Meaningful Wedding Vows. And she lives in New York's Hudson Valley. And again, her new book is Making Peace with Death and Dying, and the link for that is in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Judith now. Thank you so much for being with us, Judith.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. So the presentation, our workshop today is based, as Claire said, on my new book that's about to come out called Making Peace with Death and Dying. And I just wanted to say a few words about the book before we begin. This book was a labor of love, and it took about 15 years, and it was the fulfillment of a deathbed promise to my mother. My mother died in 2006. And she and I shared a home the last 9 years of her life. And during the last 6 months, it was quite dramatic. And on her deathbed, she grabbed my wrist and she made me promise that I would write about what we learned together about dying and death in a culture that was really ill at ease with these parts of our lives. And so that's what this book came out of. That was my motivation. And I'm very happy to say, Dear Mommy Up Above, it's done. It's coming out on March 8th. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I'm going to work with a lot of slides today. So we're going to go back and forth from talking to each other and having slides. So bear with me as I do those transitions, please. So I'm going to start us off with that now. And here we go. Here we go. There we go. So here we are. So that's the cover of my book. I love my new cover. And again, today's workshop is based on this book. One of the things I find most interesting is that death is normal. Okay, it's as normal as birth. And if you think about the typical life journey of all these different stages of life, no one is inherently better or worse than another. They are all just different stages of life. And yet we have assigned different value judgments to these different stages. And that's where there's a challenge that I think we need to really pay attention to here. Okay. In fact, everything that lives dies: flowers, fish, animals, us. Death is as normal as birth. And our discomfort about death is a learned behavior. And that's a very important thing to recognize. It's a learned behavior, and it can be unlearned just as easily. And I'd suggest that that's where we have a great upside potential here. I want us to take a look at the definition of life and death in our dictionaries. I thought this was fascinating. Death is literally defined as the termination of life. And if you look at the definition of life, what you find out is that life is defined as the end of our physical body. Anybody have any ideas about what are the implications of that? Anybody have any thoughts on that? You can unmute yourself, I think.
I suppose, where is the spirit? If the focus is just on the material?
Correct. That's the thing that I find most dramatic about this is this definition of life is all about metabolic processes and all of the dynamics of how the physical body works. And that when that stops, that's death. And for many of us who have a spiritual sense of who we are, this doesn't relate to that yet. This is how our culture, the culture that we live in, defines life and death in this way. And I think that's very important to pay attention to. We're going to do, I want us to start off with a journaling exercise. I hope you all got the message to have something to write with. And I'd like you to take a few minutes and answer this question. What do you think and how do you feel about your own death? So write about this, and if you can, see if you can articulate not only what you think and feel, but why. There's nothing right or wrong about what or how you feel. This exercise is simply an opportunity for you to take the time to explore this question and articulate what is present for you. And I recommend what I call ruthless honesty. And when we're done, I'm going to give you 5 minutes on this. And at the end of 5 minutes, we're going to go into some breakout groups and talk to partners and then come back and talk as a group on this. So I'll let you know when you have 5 minutes. Okay. I'll let you know when there's 1 minute. So you have about another minute. What do you think and how do you feel about your own death? Okay, so now we're going to go into some breakout rooms. And let's see. I'm going to put you in pairs. So we have, here we go. So we're going to go off into breakout rooms. You're going to have 10 minutes. So at 5 minutes, we'll let you know to switch partners. Each one will spend 5 minutes sharing your thoughts about this question. And then we're going to come back to the full group. So enjoy. Claire, can you hear me?
Yes.
I gave them 15 minutes because I had to put 3 people in some of the rooms because there were rooms where only one person was.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay.
Judith? You're on mute.
I don't know if she hears you, or there we go.
Oh, there she goes. Judith, I just, what I did with the booklet, I uploaded it to Google Drive and I made it public and I sent you a link via email. If you go to that email, you'll see the link is in there. If you
Okay.
could give it to Claire, and Claire, can you make sure that you can actually see the booklet?
Sure.
Can
So
you, Jasmine, why don't you just send it to Claire?
Oh. Hold on. Because I'm on two computers
Okay.
right now, so that's why.
All right, let me see if I can get to it. Claire,
uh-huh.
I lost track of time. Can you put a message to the people in the rooms to switch partners?
Sure, let's see. Broadcast message to all. Okay, sure. Okay, you sent the drive. I can check it to make sure it works. Okay, yeah, it says, sorry, the file you have requested does not exist.
I'm on Renaissance, right? You're under Renaissance, Claire?
Yeah, New Renaissance.
Got it. I'm sending you a link.
Okay,
Tell me if it works, and then we can put it in the chat once it does.
is this via email or, oh, here,
I'm going to put it in the chat right now, but in private. Here you go.
cool. Okay, thinking it's working. Yep, it works.
Fantastic. All right, Judith, it worked. So you can put this link in the chat now as a public link.
Do you want me to add it to send it to everyone or?
I don't know, we need to talk to Judith if she wants it now, but when she needs the booklet, that's the link,
Okay, cool.
okay?
Sounds good. Let's see, is someone messaging in the breakouts? Let's see. So it looks like they have 1 more minute in the breakout room.
Can I get back to my room? I hit the wrong thing and I haven't even checked in yet because we had 3.
Oh, let's see.
I did to get back.
I think they're about to end, unfortunately. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
Yeah, I had 0 people show up on my room except for me.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, so sorry.
It's okay.
We were lucky, I guess, then. I definitely met with somebody. Are you guys saying you didn't have anybody in your room to talk to?
Yeah, I was alone.
Oh. Aw,
It's
Me-
all right.
Me too.
yeah,
I was alone too.
Me
yeah.
too.
Huh, how funny. I mean, not funny,
But
yeah.
it's hard, you know, the Zoom thing.
I know, yeah, good old Zoom.
Okay, I think everyone's back now. Judith, do you want me to mute everyone or keep everyone unmuted? It looks like you're muted, Judith. We'll just, oh, there she is.
Okay, so anyway, my apologies to you all for if you ended up in a room alone. But now we have a chance to at least speak with each other. So I'd like to invite you, anyone who would like to share. And if you would mute yourself, if you're not sharing, that would be helpful. But anyone who wants to share, please unmute yourself and go ahead and share. If you'd like to raise your hand to do that, we can do it that way. Carolyn.
I was in a room with Lynn, and I told her what I felt was anxiety, and that you only think about death when someone else has died. And we shared a lot. And one of the things I was telling her that when I wake up in the morning, death is not at the top of the food chain. You know, I'm thinking about my list and all the other stuff that I need to do for the rest of the week, the rest of the day. And then when somebody dies, you know, you just sort of stop and you go, oh, shoot, I still need to go to the grocery store, you know, that type of thing. But I told her one of the things that we talked about was I told her that I have pictures of my ancestors on my bookshelf. And I told her, I said, whenever I go someplace or whether I'm in a difficult situation, I told her I take my ancestors with me. And she shared that her mother and dad died last year, and she feels that they are still with her. And she said that's really, really comforting. And the other thing is that when I made arrangements for funerals, deaths, whatever, you know, for the final act, I wasn't anxious or anything. I felt really good about it. And of course, when you tell people, you know, I really feel good about making arrangements for my, you know, you say, what? What are you talking about? And so nobody really wants to listen to whenever you talk about death. You know, I think I have one friend that I can talk to about death. Is that right, Anne? So anyway, and I read this book called Stiff, and it's about how they take cadavers and use them as experiments and that type of thing. Nobody wanted to hear about that book. But, you know, it's those types of things where you really need to be aware of what's going on, you know, to make ready for, you know, your death. But
Right.
It's really kind of hard to do that when you're not encircled with friends that say, oh, let's talk about death tonight, instead of let's talk about somebody else's, you know,
Right.
nurturing, or something. But basically, that's basically what we both kind of felt the same thing. And we talked about the afterlife, but I won't take it that much time.
Right.
Yeah, but anyway, that was
Carolyn,
it.
is there anything you'd like to share about what you wrote about, or about looking at what about your own death?
Well, basically, my own death, I said, I really don't want to suffer, and you really want, you don't want to be in a nursing home or anywhere with your tongue hanging out and not knowing who you are and not able to wipe your butt, that type of thing. I don't really want to be a burden on anybody, and I live in Oregon, and that's where we have, death with dignity and that type of thing. And I have had a couple of friends that had asked me if I would be willing to help them pass away like that, because if their children wouldn't do it for them, or if there's something happened with their children, because they know my attitude toward that.
Right.
But I've been in nursing homes and I've been in care facilities, and it's not pretty.
Right. So I'm going to ask if I'm going to see if we can move, if anyone else wants to share, because we don't have a whole lot of time for this right now, but I really appreciate what you've shared. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Who else would like to share? Elizabeth.
Thank you, Judith. I just obviously unmuted myself. I shared a session with Deanna, and one thing I can share that she shared with me, it was toward the very end, was that she wanted to hold on to the thing the way she preferred to go, just to hold on to that. And to me, that was really profound, because there's so many things you can either think or feel about and get rather scattered. And one of the things I realized when I was writing a little bit was that I had a lot of ambivalent feelings about death.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good awareness. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I can share that many years ago, I lived in the Philippines, and I was so happy to hear what you said about death being a part of life and that it's normal to die. And that was very, very noticeable there, that they don't cut it off as a separate part of a process of living.
Right.
And that was a wonderful thing to experience. And so now, having had a mother who passed at 100, I was there. I think I feel I would like to go with that sense of wonderment. And I was thinking about winter. I was on a walk just before I came into your session, and noticed everything's muted. There's no color or very little. Everything's withdrawn and still. And that willingness to be still within, and that's where the life is going. So it felt that's the way to go.
Thank you. Let's take one more sharing right now. Who else would like to share with us?
I would like to share.
And who is this?
Shelley.
Okay. Hi
There
there.
we go. Sorry, I'm not the best at this camera thing. I'm kind of excited about it.
Okay.
Right. I volunteer for hospice. I think it's a really beautiful thing. And I think if we could lose our fear with death, it would be super great for all of us.
I agree.
Right. Yes, you. I can't remember your name, lovely lady, but I liked your comments about talking about death and not having anyone to talk to because it freaks them out.
Yeah.
It's part of life. I mean, we're dying as soon as we're conceived. So you gotta, kind of embrace it.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move on because I have a lot of material I'd like to cover with you, and we will get more sharing in later. So I thank you. And if you could all mute yourselves again. I want to talk to you specifically about the death taboo. And which is, of course, the subject of my book. This name, the death taboo, finally came into our language about in 1973 when Ernest Becker wrote this famous book, The Denial of Death. And he called it the vital lie, man's refusal to acknowledge his own mortality. And we have been programmed to relate to death with fear and avoidance. It's very important to understand that, because this has had an enormous impact on us and how we live our lives, because it puts us in a position of living in fear and pushing away from something that's perfectly natural. It's important to understand how powerful that dynamic is in our lives. And it's not our fault that we're afraid. We are afraid because we were taught to be afraid. And we're going to talk a little bit about why and how we have come to have that feeling and that belief. The good news is that there are great changes that are underway in our understanding of death. And as Shell mentioned, that she works for hospice as a volunteer. And hospice is one of the most powerful influences on how we are changing the culture of death in our country right now. So I want to share with you about the 5, and this is part of the material that's covered in depth in my book, is that there are basically 5 deep taproots to the American death taboo. The first is polarized thinking. And this is important for us to understand. If you notice how much of your life is spent sorting through experiences of, I like this, I don't like this, yes, no, good, bad. And that sorting process that's done out of the ego dominates our life experience unless we start elevating the level of consciousness from which we're living our lives. And that lends itself very naturally because of past attitudes towards death in our society. It holds us in this right, wrong, good, bad attitude about life and death. The Black Plague, because our society has such strong roots from European culture to a large extent, the Black Plague has played a huge part in how we look at death. Black Plague was from 1348 until 1352. Now, what happened at that time in Europe, whoops, we went backwards on our slides. What happened during that time was that 1/2 of the European population was lost to that plague. Now, certainly we have our own reference point of what it means to have an accelerated death rate in our society now that we're dealing with COVID. But imagine half the population being wiped out by one disease. That's what they dealt with during the Black Plague. And I'm going to show you a visual representation of that later that'll bring that more to life. The other 3 that I want to mention to you are all things that have historically taken death out of our everyday lives. The birth of the funeral industry happened around the Civil War when soldiers were dying away from home and people wanted to bring their bodies home to bury. And that lended itself to an acceptance of embalming so that bodies could be preserved for transport. And that started the whole funeral industry in our society. And people that made furniture were all of a sudden making coffins. And all of a sudden we had these people who were professionals at dealing with dead bodies and the rituals for death. Prior to that, they all took place in the home. We used to live in intergenerational families. We had people that were being, babies were being born into the family and people were getting sick in the family. People were dying in the family. That was a normal part of life. But all of a sudden, the dying and death got taken away. We institutionalized also our medical care. And when people got sick, instead of being sick at home and it being normal for us to see that, people got taken to hospitals and in places. Same thing, we institutionalized the sick and the elderly. This is how we really formulated and grabbed hold of this sense of death being wrong and bad, because we became unable to deal with it because it became so foreign to us, okay? There have been 10 major costs and consequences of honoring the death taboo. And I want to go through these a little bit with you because this is a huge piece of my book, and I think it's really interesting information. That when we live in fear, and we're going to take a closer look at this in a few slides, is that when we live in fear, we're living in contraction. It's like living with the brakes on. So when we're afraid of death, we're living in fear, and that doesn't serve us, okay? The second major consequence is being ill-informed, unprepared, and ill-equipped for death. It's like it went with the three monkeys, you know, the see no, hear no, speak no evil. It's like we go towards death like this. It's like, oh, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to feel, I don't want to deal with it. And so we blind ourselves, and we're not prepared to deal with that. Again, we bias ourselves towards youth. If you look at our, you know, all the ways that we have, look at the plastic surgery industry in terms of all the ways that we try to look young. I have to say, I'm very happy that I liberated myself and let my hair go to its natural color finally, you know, instead of all the years of dyeing my hair. Emotional isolation. There's an example I want to share with you. When my mother was in her last 6 months, we spent so much time in the hospital. And I remember there's this one man that I remember so vividly. He was visiting his wife. He would come every day at around 4 o'clock. And this woman was across the hall from us. She was there alone all day long, except for medical personnel coming in and out. She had no other visitors. Her husband came every day at 4 o'clock. He stayed for about 20 minutes, and he sat far from her at the end of her bed, fiddled with the, you know, fidgeted with the rim of his hat, barely said a word to her. And I just was so, I felt such a sense of her sadness and her isolation from him. A lot of people are so afraid. It's almost like people are afraid that death is contagious. You know, it's like they don't want to be around dead people, dying people, or something like that. They forget this is my loved one. And people lose sight of the person who is in the body that is having trouble. Okay. And we need to keep our love alive. And I want to suggest you know, going back to that man, I want to say that what I remember sitting in my mother's room and thinking about how important it was to us to just touch each other sometimes. And I want you to do something very simple right now. And this is something that I wish this man had done with his wife. If he could have sat his chair next to her, even if he couldn't say anything, if he could have just touched her hand. So take one hand, and I want you to just lovingly put your other hand on top of your one hand. And just move your one hand on top of the other and see if it doesn't feel wonderful. You know, just remember how powerful human touch is. I want to remind you of that if you're dealing with people who are going through the end of their lives. And there's one caveat to that, and that is that in the very final stages of life, when somebody is actually in the withdrawal from life, you don't want to be necessarily touching them a lot because they might be pulling away and needing not to be brought back. So, and always ask first, is it okay if I touch you? But if it's okay, it's a great comfort. The disconnection between our wishes and reality. If you ask people, there's lots of studies that have been done, and 90% of people say, I want to die at home. You know, don't put me in a hospital. I want to be at home. 75% of us will die in a hospital or nursing home right now. That's the odds. So we don't have it worked out in a way that really matches what people's desires are. We also postpone and avoid end-of-life planning. There's great denial of the power of grief. Up until about 10 years ago, the average corporation only allowed people 4 days off if they had a loved one, you know, like a parent or a child or a spouse who died. And who moves through grief in 4 days? We don't. We have deep, deep wounds that need to be healed and need space and time. The cost of death and grief in the workplace, there are studies that have been done that say that on average, 1 in 4 workers at any given time is dealing with a major loss in their life. We need to recognize that death and dying are always present in our lives, and we need to incorporate them in how we live. And the impact of the death taboo on the medical model. I want to give you 2 quick examples. One is that we've set up the medical model to deal with preserving life. And so that's kind of a denial of death. it's like it deals with all those life stages up to, but not including the end, because there is a point where there's nothing further to be done medically. And when there's nothing further to be done medically, a lot of doctors perceive that as a personal failure. And so they don't want to acknowledge it. And that's why there's often a difficulty in making that transition for a doctor to say, I think it's time to consider hospice. And is why it's very important, if you are involved in the process of making that decision for a loved one, if you see that the doctor's gun shy, step up and open the topic, because hospice is wonderful. I'll get to that later. The other thing I wanted to mention is that how backwards some of the cultures are in some of the hospitals. When I was researching this book, one of the examples that was given in one of the thanatology textbooks was a contemporary hospital where the word death was forbidden, and on the floors that had patients. And instead they had a code, and the code was just awful. It was, you would say to another employee, guess who's not going to be shopping at Walmart anymore? Now, what could be more insensitive than that? And to think that that's where we are as a culture is kind of sad. And finally, in terms of the costs that we pay for allowing the death taboo to have such a hold on us, is it prevents us from really thinking deeply about the deeper spiritual mysteries and wisdoms of life and death itself. I want to talk about fear with you. Fear is a fantasy expectation that appears real. Another version of this is false evidence appearing real. Kind of interesting when you think about it. Fear is a figment of our imagination. Isn't that interesting? I mean, it's an energy, and imagine that you've created an image, a thought of, oh my God, what if this happens? That's what we do when we create a fear, okay? Fear is a feeling. It is an anxiety produced by the sense that you're about to lose something that you love. So I want to do one more quick writing exercise here, and I'd like you to make a list. Hold on a minute. There we go. I'd like you to make a list of, where are you? There you are. Make a list of things just off the top of your head, things that I'm afraid of. Things that I'm afraid of. Just take a few minutes to jot them down. What makes you contract and resist experiencing? Where does fear show up in your life? And go ahead and unmute yourself and start calling out some of the things that show up on your list. Just call them out.
I said fear of what other people will think of something. Could be something that you're voicing your opinion and then they don't have the same thing. And I guess it's just a fear of what they're going to think about what I said or may have done.
Right. So being judged by other people.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. What else? Anybody else?
Well, I'm kind of fearful of relationships and love.
I didn't hear that.
Fear of relationships.
Fear of relationships? Okay. What else?
Unkindness.
Unkindness. What else?
Fear of going to the hospital.
Okay. Going to the hospital. What else?
Pain.
Pain.
Kept alive too long.
Being kept alive too long. Okay. And if we move on to thinking about things that about death that we're afraid of, what are some of the things that would come up there?
Loss of control. Unprepared, feeling unprepared.
Being unprepared. Okay. And we've talked about pain and suffering.
Being hooked up.
What?
But Anne,
Being hooked up to tubes, going in and out of
being
everything.
hooked up to tubes, okay?
Right.
A lot of people afraid of losing control. What else?
Yeah.
Being, having people around you who don't want you to die and you want to die.
Right.
Yes, yes.
Good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Having no one around you when you're dying.
Yeah, being alone. A lot of people are afraid of being alone. I want to read you a passage that is so fascinating to me, and I want you to think about this and about fear. All right, and this comes from the work of Bruce Lipton and Steve Behrman. And they have, I think, a fascinating description of what happens physiologically to us in our bodies and in our minds. So it's a little long, but listen to this and think about the things that you're afraid of and what is actually happening inside of you as a result, okay? So according to Bruce Lipton and Steve Behrman in Spontaneous Evolution, when we are in a happy state, we are in a state of growth. And when we get afraid, we get in a state of protection. And when we get in a state of protection, it completely changes the blood flow of the body. Because when you're in a state of growth, you're nourishing the viscera and the organs that take care of maintaining your health. But when you start to get afraid, you send the blood to the arms and the legs because they are what you're going to use for fight or flight to escape the issue or deal with the problem. The blood vessels in the gut squeeze shut, which forces the extra blood to go to the periphery to nourish the fight or flight behavior. Well, the same hormones that affect blood vessels in the brain, because when we're in a state of happiness and growth, we're using our conscious reasoning and our thinking and our logical thought. But in a state of reaction to a threat, conscious reasoning is not very helpful because it's a slow process. So basically what happens is in the presence of stress hormones, blood vessels in the forebrain, which is the center of conscious reasoning and logic, are squeezed shut, just like the blood vessels in the gut. And this forces the blood to go to the hindbrain. Well, the hindbrain is reflex and reactive behavior. So basically it says from the moment you get under stress, you actually shut down the thinking processes of the conscious mind and open up the reactive reactionary processes of the hindbrain. Very simply put, when we are under stress, we become less intelligent.
Stupid. Yeah.
When you think about it, isn't that interesting? If ever there's a reason to stop being afraid, it's because it makes you a little bit stupid. So think about that next time you get afraid and take a deep breath. One of the things that really helps when you're afraid is remember that fear has you focusing out away from now. You're focusing into the future. The best thing you can do is take a deep breath and bring yourself into the present, okay? And bring yourself present and say, okay, so I have some concern about that. Is there anything I need to be doing about that right now? And if so, let me take a look at that. You want to come into the present moment and deal with taking some action in the present, okay? So the next slide, I told you that I was mentioning about all the ways that our society has this negative image of death. And I want you to see this because 60% of communication, over 80% of communication is nonverbal. So it's interesting to see our culture's visual representations of death. And for over 15 years now, I have been doing image searches online of the word death. And the slide that I'm about to show you is a summary of visual imagery that I've been seeing for the first 10 of those 15 years. These are the images that have shown up. So think about, how do these images make you feel? And again, you can unmute yourself and call out what feelings you have when you see these images, okay? Hold on. Play. Are you ready? Here we go. How do these images make you feel?
Scared.
Scared. What else?
Horrified.
Horrified.
Cold.
Confused.
Yeah.
Right. Now I want to draw your attention to the middle bottom picture with the skeletons.
Yeah.
Remember we talked about the Black Plague. This is an image that dates back to the mid 1300s that from the Black Plague. And what was happening at that time is people thought that people thought that the plague was a form of punishment from God. And what they were trying to do was say, oh, I'm not afraid. So they drew these pictures and wore them on their clothing as a way to try to communicate to death and say, oh, you can pass over me. I'm already dead. Now, this image, all right, this image, it shows up now. 2022. It was drawn in the mid 1300s. Can you imagine how powerful the imagery and the fear of death is in our culture? This is why we have to do our own work to clear our consciousness and free ourselves of this fear. Okay. Now I'm going to show you another slide, and these are the kinds of pictures that have started to come up in the past 5 years. And so call out how they make you feel.
Calming.
Yes, enlightened. Enlightened.
Calming, what else?
Enlightened.
Enlightened. So the
Hopeful.
Breathing deeply.
Peaceful.
Peaceful.
Okay. I mean, notice there's color in these pictures, which is a little different. These are images that prior to the past 5 years have been typically associated with near-death experiences.
Right.
And they were poo-pooed in the mainstream because science was constantly saying, oh, I can explain. That's just, certain nerve impulses in the dead brain and blah, 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 blah. The scientists had all ways of explaining
Blah, blah,
this, saying, poo-poo to this, okay? And then a man named Eben Alexander, I don't know how many of you know of him. Eben Alexander is a neurosurgeon, and he was one of the people who poo-pooed this. But then he had a near-death experience. Okay, he had a near-death experience, and he wrote the book Proof of Heaven. And these are the kinds of things that he himself saw. And his voice coming forward with his credentials has had a powerful impact, and I think is a large reason why we're seeing this shift in the imagery. Okay, so I wanted to share that with you. Now, one other thing I want you to think about is I have a very little video I want to show you. And this to me brings home the fact of how deeply and how early we get impressed with the fear of death. It's hard to believe, and I'm going to ask you to kind of mute yourselves until the video is off, and then you can open up and share your comments, okay? Here we go. Anybody have something they'd like to share about that?
I want to know who told her that. I can't imagine. What is she, about 4 or 5 years old, maybe less than that? And I kept thinking, clearly that seemed to be a learned behavior.
Well, and regardless of how she learned it, it's very clear that she has a very deep angst and anxiety. I mean, that is
Yeah.
inside this child.
That's
Anybody
terrible.
else have something they want to say on that? Any other reactions? And I can't see the second screen of people, so please call out.
Hey, Elizabeth, I used to teach, and so I'm sure that's colored my reaction.
Mhm.
But I felt a deep sense of wonderment in a way. That's not the right word, but I felt this child needs to be held in her experience. She has something she needs to express, regardless of how I might feel.
Mhm.
And so it was just a sense of holding.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's what I was thinking too. I work with children and I was just thinking like, I've had that feeling before. Like, let's have that feeling together. I know exactly what that feeling is like wanting something to stay exactly as it is.
Right.
Forever, you know. I was just so moved. That was such a special video. I'd never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Sure does get the point across, doesn't it?
Sure does, yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything they want to say on this? Okay. So I'm going to move on. We're going back to another slide here. Okay. So coming to the present moment in terms of where are we in this evolution of our culture of death? There are too many of the 2.8 million Americans who die each year, and those who love and care for them suffer through the experience, emotionally isolated, frightened, ignorant of their options, and unprepared spiritually and practically. And I'd like to say that 2.8 million is a number that preceded COVID. So given the death rate that we're getting from COVID, that's really 3.3 million people each year for the past 2 years, okay? But the fact of the disconnect and the lack of embracing people through to their death, we need to be there with our loving hearts, escorting people to the end of their lives. This is a service we need to provide for each other. We need to be there. The death taboo essentially is preventing us from masterfully meeting the end of our life's journey. And my book talks in depth about 3 essential changes that we can make that will change our way of experiencing aging, dying, and death. And the first is called existential maturity, which is basically about how do I achieve a sense of peaceful acceptance about mortality. The second one has to do with talking about death. And the third is what I call putting our ducks in a row before we go. So let's look at existential maturity, okay? We spend so much of our time consumed by the routines of our daily lives and so little time developing a deeper sense of the purpose of our lives and our existence and exploring some of the very essential questions about life, like who are we and what's really important? Where do we come from? Why are we here? And what happens to us when we die? When we start thinking about these kinds of questions, we get a deeper sense of what life is about and a sense of deeper purpose to our own lives. And when we deepen the purpose of our lives, we live with a higher level of consciousness. It goes hand in hand. And it's extremely important that we go into this place of deeper thinking about what life is all about. And exploring questions like these is a great way to develop this thing called existential maturity. I want to read you an excerpt from my book on this that I think is very helpful. The fear of death is at once culturally pervasive, yet deeply private. The process of developing existential maturity involves recognizing and diminishing what Pema Chodron and her root teacher, Chögyam Rinpoche, refer to as ubiquitous anxiety. It's the underlying fear of uncertainty and not knowing what is happening or what is going to happen. It's a desire to feel safe, secure, and comfortable, having all the answers. Yet our existential situation does not provide us with any certainty. Developing existential maturity requires moving our fears and anxiety to the background while enabling our love, our courage, and compassion and authenticity to come to the foreground. It is what Pema Chodron calls cultivating bravery, so that we can be okay and not shut down in the face of our fears. When we choose to develop our existential maturity, we also make a personal contribution to the collective process of transforming the culture of death from one of death denial to one where we encounter death in a way that lovingly supports us as individuals, families, and as a society. So here are 9 keys to transforming your relationship with death and dying. I want to go through these with you. And this is actually the topic of the whole second half of my book, covers these in great detail. But the first one, again, is lifting above right and wrong thinking. And that as long as we remain in fear of death and perceive it as something to avoid, we cannot be at peace with death. So that's why it's imperative that we practice when we find ourselves, and this is an important habit to create, is listen to yourself. When you hear yourself going into judgment about what you like and don't like, and see if you can put that in the background and pull forward a greater sense of compassion and cooperation with whatever it is that's going on at that time. It's just a daily practice that really helps tremendously. I also have mentioned investigating our deepest beliefs and fears. When we really look at our beliefs and our fears, it helps us set better priorities in our lives about what really matters to us. And, perhaps we'll find ourselves turning off the TV a few times to do a little journaling or something, to really get a little deeper relationship with ourselves. The third one is giving of your tender and vulnerable heart. When we truly make loving one another a priority, we stop making excuses for not showing up. It's one of the things that I've seen so much, both in my coaching work with people who are dealing with end-of-life issues, and as a chaplain in my hospital, is so many people, and I experienced this with my mother as well, is so many people make excuses of, oh, I'd really like to help. Oh, I'd love to come and see you, but I really can't. So what they do is they focus on all their excuses, but a lot of times it's really not that they don't have the time. It's that they're scared, that they don't know what to say or what to do. I remember one time many years ago, my mother had a great big heart surgery. And I remember my brother coming to visit when I was there, and he was astounded that it occurred to me to, for example, put a cool washcloth on her forehead. She was burning up with a fever. It was just a natural thing to do. But when we move away from our fear and focus on being of service and helping the other person, we then can tune in to what is it that they need? What can I do to help this person? How can I demonstrate my love for you? Okay, so when we focus on our loving and caring for the person rather than our fear about what they're going through, it also brings us back into the present moment where we can take a better, appropriate action. Honoring your truth. Another thing that I see happening frequently with end-of-life issues is where loved ones sometimes think that they know better than the person who's dying how they should do their death. Or, for example, one example is when towards the very end of life, people will start refusing food, for example. They don't want to drink, they don't want to eat. And it's not unusual for a caregiver to say, no, 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 you must eat. Now, come on, you have to build your strength. But if you're really paying attention to what's going on for that person, if they don't want to eat, don't force them. Okay. A lot of people are, and this is a fear piece. A lot of people are afraid that they're going to starve and that's going to hurt. If the body is shutting down, it doesn't need that food. Okay. And it's not painful. And so we have a lot of misconceptions, and it's important to educate ourselves. Another thing about honoring your truth is I remember when my mother was, I was helping her make her plans about what she wanted for end of life rituals. And she personally wanted to be cremated, but then she decided, I don't want to do that because I don't think your brother and sister would approve. And I think it's important to stand up for what you want for yourself. It's important to be respectful of other people's wishes, but when it's your life, it's your responsibility. And we owe it to ourselves to really make ourselves a priority. Another piece on this particular topic is how many times, so many times I've seen situations where people get into conflict about what they think the person should do or not do. Should you have this treatment or not? And I think it's important to support people to realize that it's their death, not yours. And what can I do to help you? Like, would you like to talk about this? All right. So put yourself in a support role. Remember that it's their death, not yours. So that allow the person to honor the truth of what's true for them. The fifth one, taking time and making time. I was doing a workshop with a group of people. A group of young business leaders had hired me to come and do a retreat with them. And it was so interesting how one of the members, and all of these people owned their own companies, had dynamic lives, busy lives. And one of the members in the group was a woman whose best friend was in stage 4 cancer at the time. And even though she ran her own company, every week without fail, she spent Tuesday with her best friend who was dying. Wasn't that she wasn't busy like the rest of us, but she chose to make it a priority. And I was so impressed by that. You know, she made sure that she delegated to other people all the other things that she had to do, but Tuesdays were their time from all the way through to the end. And even though her friend was declining steadily all through that, she was there for it. And can you imagine what a gift of love that was to her friend? What a beautiful thing to do. 6th is entertaining uncertainty, loss, and sadness. We get so acclimated to trying to sort our lives into I want all this happiness and don't give me any pain and suffering, please. You know, it's as though we're at a restaurant ordering our meal. We forget that loss and sadness are normal parts of life. And if you think about it, if you reflect over your life, you probably find that some of the hardest experiences of your life were the ones that gave you the most wisdom and valuable inner learning that has served you well moving forward in your life. So when you find yourself resisting things like, oh, I have this pain and I have to make it go away, or, you know, people, as they get older, sometimes have chronic pain. We need to learn how to embrace that as normal. It's part of life. And how do I stay in my well-being in the presence of pain and suffering? That becomes a more important question. Is look at it as a balancing act. How do I stay in my well-being? Nurturing, supporting, and serving, we've kind of covered that. Unearthing your treasures. I want to bring this one to your attention because it's actually my favorite chapter in that book. This chapter is about letting people know who you are. And if you think about it as a kind of a living legacy, if you notice when people like do the genealogy of their family, what they look at is, you know, they have this family tree and this one was so-and-so's mother and so-and-so's brother or spouse or this or that. And it's all of this, but there's no flesh on the bones about what was her favorite recipe? How did she feel? What was it like for her being her? And this is the kind of thing that I'm encouraging people to capture in journals, in annotated picture books, whatever they want to do, but document for your children and for others after you. Who are you? What is it like from your point of view to be who you are? Because it'll really help. And also, you don't want people to memorialize you from their point of view. Let them know what it was like. Who are you? And what's your life like? And the last one is putting your ducks in a row before you go, specifically dealing with end-of-life planning, which I'm going to cover on the next slide. So in addition to this, I created this next slide to cover the on a more personal level. I created what I call a to-do list. Things to do before I die, AKA how to increase my chances of having a good death. Okay. First one, I've talked about this a lot today. Think and talk about death. It's very important. The more that you allow yourself to engage with this topic, the easier it becomes for you to stand in relationship to it. Also, initiate conversations. You know, I've heard several of you say that, oh, I have this one person I can talk to about this topic. See if you can broach the subject with somebody else. Be brave about it. Help break down the barriers that exist between us. And a great way to do it is to go to a death cafe. If you've never heard of death cafes, there's a website called deathcafe.com. And it's a very interesting thing that got started in September of 2011. Some guy, I think he was in England, decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start something called the Death Cafe. And I'm going to get people who are total strangers to come together, have a cup of coffee, eat a piece of cake, and talk about death. Now, that might sound like a pretty bizarre concept, but it has caught on like wildfire. Since then, since 2011, so 11 years now, there have been 13,670 death cafes in 81 countries around the world. So clearly there's a need for this. So not only talk to your family and friends and talk to yourself about death, go to a death cafe. They now have them online thanks to COVID. And it's quite a fascinating experience. You'll be broken up into a group of about 6 people. I remember the first one that I went to, there was a woman who was stage 4 cancer. There was a woman who was from a cultural group that was very, I'm going to call it Little House on the Prairie kind of dress, and a very conservative, isolated group of people that had their own way of living and dealing with, very strong community sense. And it was so interesting listening to different people's views and senses about life and death. Again, on your to-do list is to work on your existential maturity. Educate yourself about end-of-life medical issues. I have a booklet that I'm going to get to you. I don't know whether we successfully got it into the chat box, but I'm going to look at that just before we end. It's a wonderful it's an end-of-life, it's an advanced healthcare planning booklet for the state of New York. And even though these things are handled state by state, healthcare proxies and advanced healthcare planning, this particular booklet does an excellent job of describing all the different considerations about different types of healthcare and medical procedures that you may or may not want at the end of life. And it's a great educational tool that I want to pass on to you. And if we don't get it successfully in the chat box, we'll send it to you, okay? Finally is think about and legally document your preferences for end-of-life medical care, for your will, the will, your trust, and funeral or memorial service. End-of-life medical care that is usually called a healthcare proxy. What that means is that you appoint a person who has the legal right to speak on your behalf if you're unable to speak for yourself about medical procedures that you want or don't want, how you want to be cared for. Now, think about this as not necessarily an end of life issue, but anytime you go under anesthesia, that person should be notified, and your doctors should know who that is. Because if something comes up and a decision has to be made, you want your wishes known. So when you do, and this is in all three of these categories here, end of life healthcare planning, will or trust, and funeral or memorial services. Each one of these, there's two huge reasons why you want to do these three things. One is so your voice can be heard. If you don't fill out these forms and you don't file them legally and you don't communicate your wishes, nobody knows what you want. And you forego the right of them knowing. And so other people will make decisions on your behalf. So let your voice be heard, and so it can be honored. And the second reason to do this is as an act of love for your loved ones. If you don't put your affairs in order, it ends up falling to your loved ones to try and figure out what you would want. And it's a terrible position to put other people in. So I just want to encourage you all that if you haven't got this stuff handled, please do it. A lot of people, in terms of having a will or a trust, a lot of people say, oh, well, I don't really own anything. I don't have anything. It doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. What if you have two sisters who both want that flower vase that you had? Do you want them to be fighting over it? It might be something as simple as that, but that has sentimental value. So do yourself and your loved ones a favor with that. I want to say a few words about hospice. When I was very fortunate that about 3 months before my mother died, one of the times that we were in the emergency room, one of the doctors took me aside and he sat me in his office and he looked me straight in the eye and he said, "There's nothing further that can be done medically for your mother." And here we were in the emergency room, it's like, it's kind of like this rhythm of trying to get her fixed, so we could carry on. And it took me from the job of trying to fix her and keep her going to finally accepting this is the end of my mother's life. And he was the one who recommended hospice. And I am forever grateful to him for that, because for us, it felt like we were abducted by angels. It was just, up until then, I was running as fast as I could, trying to do a good job in a territory I knew nothing about. And that's what happens to a lot of caregivers. And hospice turned out to be wonderful. It was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I could always pick up the phone, and I knew that somebody would willingly pick up the phone and be there for me and guide me through whatever I needed to know. And then there were also people coming in and out of the house all the time. And they cared about me as a caregiver, as well as my mother, as the patient. One of the things that's kind of sad is in terms of the statistics, people are afraid of hospice because it does mean that moment of transition from the person's going to get better to we are surrendering to the fact that this is the end of their life. And when we live in fear of death, that's a hard transition. When we accept death, we can open our arms more lovingly to welcoming in hospice. I want to read these statistics to you. Most patients enroll in hospice very close to the time of death. For instance, approximately half will die, within 3 weeks. Half will die within 3 weeks, and 35.7% of patients die within 1 week. Moreover, among all patients, the percentage referred to hospice for just 3 days or less doubled over the past decade from 9.8 from 4.6 to 9.8 from 4.6. So anything you can do to help encourage people to take advantage of hospice, what it means is instead of having the person go to their death without people around them who know what they're doing and who understand how to bring comfort and care to the dying, hospice brings that care and kindness present to your loved one. So it's a kindness to encourage hospice care. So we jumped to this slide and I didn't know how to get it to go back to the other one. So I'm going to go ahead and do this part with you now. I'm going to ask you to, actually, I'm going to turn off the video and I'm going to ask you to do a little guided visualization with me. And then you're going to draw a picture. So let me. Hold on a second. Come on. There we go. Okay. So if you want to turn off your video and close your eyes and just be super comfortable for this, I'd like to guide you through this. So first of all, to start, I'd like you to take a deep breath and just go into a nice sense of relaxation. And as a declaration of freedom from the tentacles of the death taboo, this is an exercise to help you create an image of yourself victorious at the finish line of your own life. It's a time to replace any fearful images of death by creating a beautiful vision of your own death. Peaceful, complete, loved, knowing that you have done your very best and ready to let go and perhaps curious about what lies ahead. Imagine that you are on your deathbed and there is a radiant smile on your face. You're not afraid. You know that you really gave your life your best. You feel peaceful and relaxed, regardless of any physical pain. Your beliefs are a comfort to you. Knowing that you are dying, you're curious and perhaps a little impatient to know what lies ahead. You're drifting in and out. Those whom you most wish to be by your side are there with you. The music of your choice is softly playing in the background. A beautiful fragrance fills the air, and your consciousness is floating in and out. You're ready to let go of your life and your loved ones. Take a look around at your surroundings. And remember that this is your fantasy of a great death for yourself. So make it a great one. Where are you? Who do you have there with you? What is going on in your mind and in your heart? And remember, this is your fantasy, so make it really good. Now open your eyes and draw a picture of what you have seen and heard. I know we're kind of out of time here, so I just want to finish up with this. And then if any of you want to stay on and talk for a few minutes and share about that exercise or anything else, I'm happy to stay for a few minutes. But I wanted to just share this at the end here. Remind you that my wonderful book, this is my awesome pitch here, Making Peace with Death and Dying, is available for pre-order through Renaissance Books, and that link is in the chat line there, and it can also be sent to you later. Also, if you want to learn more about my mentoring services for individuals, couples, or end of life, or to just say hello to me, I can be reached at judith@judithjohnson.com. And workshop participants all get a discount on any of my mentoring programs if you sign up before the beginning of March. Okay. So there's my shameless promotion. And I tried, I think Jasmine put several links in there for my link to Linktree, Instagram, my website, and my YouTube channel are all in the chat area in shares by Jasmine, if you want to look at those. So I'm going to, because I know I'm over time here, and anyone who wants to leave is welcome to do that now. And I just really want to thank you for coming. And anyone who wants to stay and chat a little bit, I'm going to open for conversation if anyone wants to share. But actually, before I do that, is that okay with you, Claire?
Oh yeah, definitely. And thank you
Okay.
so much, Judith. This was really, really good. And thank you everyone for coming and participating.
That was.
My pleasure. Thank you. Anybody want to comment? Anything you want to share?
I'd like to comment back to when you were talking about hospice.
Uh-huh.
A friend of mine whose mom was dying and was in hospice, and the hospice office where she worked at the hospital was right upstairs. And whenever she was on her lunch hour or had a break, she went up to the hospice office, and what it availed her to do was grieve before her mother passed away.
Mhm.
And she said, I would not have had it any other way, because when she died, there was just a relief, and it was just a blessing, because hospice helped her through that. And then there's other people who believe that when you go to hospice, you know, they help you. It's death instantly, and they don't want to face it and all that other stuff. So I don't talk to them. But anyway, I just thought that was just so nice of you to talk about hospice and how it helps you as the caregiver,
yes,
grieve, and it helps the person that's dying accept death. And it's a constant information trail, you know, which helps you.
Yeah. One other thing about hospice I want to share is if you're dealing with a loved one who's dying and you're looking for local resources in your community, always call your local hospices and ask them. For example, they might be able to give you leads to where you can find caregivers or other resources in the community. And usually there's a department, there's usually a county department for the aging.
Right.
In the county that you live in is another excellent resource to find who in my community, where are the resources to help me. Things like there are people that drive people to doctor's appointments, all kinds of things. Somebody else want to share? Yes, Lori.
This is kind of a weird topic, but when I was a young woman, I had an LSD experience of enlightenment, and I've never been afraid of death since then. And Oregon, the state that I live in, has recently legalized psilocybin in a therapeutic manner. For one of the things is what they call death anxiety. And I know that Johns Hopkins Hospital has been doing a lot of research, and they're already training people to do coaching to have people take a trip or two, and especially if you've been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, for example. And I was wondering if you knew anything about that and what you had to say about that.
I do know about that. And I also, I have an interesting, how do I say this? Okay, I know that has been tremendously helpful. It's important that this not be something that people go do on their own. That it needs to be done in a controlled setting. If one is to go into that, it's certainly worth exploring to see if it's right for you. I know for myself, I happen to be in a spiritual on a spiritual path that necessitates that we not use any mind-altering drugs. Because while it is extremely helpful for many, many people, and I understand what you're saying about not being afraid of death since you had that experience, I also know that there are some levels at which it can also interfere with and block certain spiritual dimensions as well. So it's a mixed blessing, but I think that it's absolutely worth exploring if you're so drawn to do that. Somebody else?
Elizabeth, I just wanted to share this book in case you have not seen it. It's called A Mother's Final Gift, written by Barry and Joyce Vistel. They live near Santa Cruz, California. And it's just a little unusual in that their mother, who she died in her late 80s or 90s, she was advanced age. She had never been afraid of death. And so it's a unique experience in that she had always said, I look forward to the next part of my life. So people may enjoy reading this.
You brought something up that I want to share just quickly. Is one of the greatest gifts to me in the end of my mother's life, and this happened 2 weeks before her death. I had a life-altering experience many years before that. I always, in fact, I have a blog on my website called The Day I Stopped Believing. I think I have it on there, The Day I Stopped Believing in God. And it's a provocative title. But the truth of the matter is that, without going into the details, I had a car accident, and the experience took me from a conceptual belief in God to experiencing the presence of God in a way that it was irrefutable for me. It was like I knew God's presence as an experience. Okay. 2 weeks before my mother died, she had her own experience like that. And these things are non-transferable. You either sound like a nut job to somebody for saying that, or somebody understands it. But 2 weeks before my mother died, she called me into the hospital, and she could barely breathe, and she was on oxygen. And she just said to me, I know. And I said, and it was out of context for me. I said, well, you know what? And she said, I know. Like, you stupid person. Of course you know what I know. Yeah. And so she says, I know that God is real. And the whole day, she explained to me that she was getting her breathing treatment that morning, and she moved into this awareness that God was breathing her. And it, on an experiential level, it just blew her mind. It blew her mind. And she knew that she had moved from the concept of God to actually having a living experience. And she tried to tell people about it all day. And all day long, they kind of patted her on the head like some stupid old lady who was out of her mind. And she kept asking me when they were going to make the announcement. And she had it in her mind that the Pope and the president and somebody else were going to interrupt all the television programs to make this announcement. And they were going to, and my mother was sharp as a tack to the end, but she thought they were going to make an announcement. And I said, well, what is the announcement? She said that God is real. People will want to live their lives differently. And she said it with such sincerity. It was just the most tender, beautiful gift. I just loved that. So how about one more sharing? Anybody else want to jump in here?
Can I just say thank
Judith.
you? This is Nicole. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. I actually met you 7 years ago. My husband and I got married at the Garrison.
Yes.
When we met with you, we ended up not using your services for kind of, I don't know, ridiculous. I don't know how I chose things, but it was a pleasure to meet you, and I liked you very much. And I think I've been on your email list. I think only recently saw emails, or maybe I just hadn't been seeing them. Then I saw your picture, and I said, "Wait, is that Judith that we met?" But I love your hair. I love your hair so much. I love your hair so much. And so I just wanted to say thank you. And I was just trying to do some different and things that I would maybe enjoy and get something out of for my birthday, because my birthday is on Wednesday, and I saw you were offering this workshop, and I said, let me go to this. And
Well, happy
thank
birthday.
you very much. Yeah, no, thank you for offering this. And thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. One more, and then we're going to close. Who's it going to be?
I will share something else. And
Well, wait a minute, you know what? I think Deanna, did you want to share?
Let Deanna go.
Yeah,
We haven't heard from her. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to thank you so much for writing this book and for this workshop. I'm an end-of-life doula, and everything that you've said is exactly what we're trying to help support people through: educating, letting them know their options, helping them have those conversations, encouraging them to plan early. So thank you so much for taking all of what we're trying to do and putting it in a book. I'm really looking forward to checking out your YouTube channel and sharing your work with our clients and other folks.
Please spread the word. And one other thing is, I am happy to give this presentation to other groups. So if you know of any other groups of people who would like to receive this presentation, this workshop, just reach out to me and help put a group together. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, great. You'll
I
probably be
really want to spread the word here. Okay.
Thank you.
So, my best wishes to each and every one of you. Talk about death. Be brave. Have a beautiful death, and love all your loved ones through this experience. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful afternoon.